Outpost Kepler-7 sat at the very edge of human space like a lit match in a dark room, small, warm, and surrounded by nothing but black. It was not a military installation, not really. It had guns. Yes, 2 railgun batteries on the north and south towers, a missile defense grid that was 3 years overdue for an upgrade, and a rotating garrison of 60 soldiers, whose biggest weekly problem was running out of decent coffee. But it was not a war station, it was a home. 847 people lived there: scientists, engineers, dockworkers, families, a school with 31 children between the ages of 4 and 12, a medical bay, a bakery that somehow made real bread, and the smell of it in the mornings had a way of making people forget they were floating in the dark at the edge of everything humanity had ever claimed. Commander Sarah Voss had been the station's commanding officer for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She kept count, not because she was unhappy, she wasn't, but because she believed a person should know exactly where they stood in time. She was 44 years old, lean and brown-skinned with gray threading through her hair that she did not bother to hide. She had served in 2 border conflicts before Kepler-7. She had seen what war looked like up close, and she had decided, somewhere those years, that the best thing a soldier could do was make sure war stayed far away from the people who hadn't asked for it. That morning she was reviewing water recycler reports when the proximity alarm went off. She was not alarmed at first. The alarm had gone off 6 times in the past year. 3 times it was debris. Once it was a HFY merchant running dark with a busted transponder. Once it was nothing at all, a sensor ghost, a hiccup in the system. Once it was a Veth survey pod that had drifted off course. She set down her coffee and walked to the command deck. Lieutenant Ossie was already there, hands moving across his station. He was 27, fresh from the academy, with the kind of focus that made him look older than he was. He did look up when Voss walked in. How many contacts? She said. I'm still counting. That was the first thing that made her stomach tighten. When it was debris, you didn't need to count. Estimate, she said. He looked up then. His face was very still. Over 100. Maybe closer to 2. She stood next to him and looked at the screen. They were coming out of fold space, one by one, and then in clusters, dropping back into normal space like stones through water. Dark shapes, long and angular, nothing like the rounded hulls of human ships or the curved organic lines of HFY or Veth vessels. These ships were built like weapons, like something that had been designed by a mind that did not see the difference between a tool and a threat. Vreth, OC said. Voss had seen Vreth ships before, once at a diplomatic summit 7 years ago. She had stood on a platform next to Vreth ambassador and shaken what passed for its hand, a hard chitinous thing with too many joints, and thought, these are not people who negotiate from weakness. Vreth were old in the way that made humans feel young and raw-edged. They had ruled 4 star systems before humanity had discovered fire. They looked at human expansion the way a man looks at a weed growing through his patio, with mild irritation that was beginning to harden into something more serious. There had been incidents, small ones, a human mining platform in the Call Nebula that went dark 8 months ago, a Vreth patrol that crossed into declared human space, and then, when challenged, simply turned around without a word. Diplomatic channels had been Tense but war, no one had said that word. Out loud, no one had believed it. 212. Ships, the final count came in. Kepler-7 had 60 soldiers and 2 railgun. Batteries, open a channel, Voss said. OC opened it. She stood in front of the comm panel and spoke clearly. Vreth. Fleet, this is Commander Sarah Voss of the human outpost Kepler-7. You are in declared human space. Please identify your intentions and respond. She paused. We are a civilian station. We are not a military target. Silence. She tried again in the standard galactic common tongue, the trade language that every spacefaring species shared. Her accent was not perfect, but her words were clear. More silence. The Wraith fleet kept coming. She had about 4 minutes before they were in weapons range. She used the first minute to try 2 more times on the comm. She used the second minute to do the math on what 200 ships could do to a station built for science and living and bread baking. She used the third minute to make sure the children in the school were moved to the inner core of the station, to the blast sheltered maintenance tunnels where the water processors hummed. She used the fourth minute to send the distress beacon, not a standard distress beacon. There were 2 distress protocols in Kepler-7 system. One was yellow, general emergency, send help. Something has gone wrong. The other was red. The red beacon had a different name in the official manual, but everyone who worked in border stations knew what it was really called. It was called the last word. The last word transmitted everything, all sensor data, all ship counts, all approach vectors, all identifications. It transmitted a real-time feed of whatever was happening, and it sent that feedback to Earth Command on a tight beam signal that nothing could jam because it used 17 redundant frequencies simultaneously. It did not ask for help. It did not plead. It simply said, this is what is happening here right now to your people. It was designed with the understanding that sometimes stations did not survive long enough for help to arrive, and the people who built it had decided that in those cases the least they could do was make sure someone knew. Voss pressed the red key. Then the Wraith opened fire. Private Marcus Chen had been in the army for 14 months. He was 22 years old and had grown up in a city called Chengdu, where the summers were hot, and his grandmother had taught him to cook dumplings, and he had wanted to be a civil engineer before he saw a recruitment poster at a train station and thought, for reasons he could not explain to himself afterward, yes, that he was at his post on the South Rail gun battery when the first volley hit the station's outer shields. The whole platform shook. He grabbed the rail with both hands and looked out through the armored viewport and saw light, not sunlight, not starlight. Fire, pulses of energy, dense and blue-white, clear his throat, coming from every direction like they had always been there, and the universe had simply been waiting to show him. His headset crackled. Sergeant Daramelwengi's voice. South Battery, target the lead ship, fire at will. He fired. The rail gun kicked. A tungsten slug the size of his forearm left the barrel at a speed that made the air around it briefly briefly shimmer. It crossed the distance to the lead Vreth ship in a fraction of a second. He saw the impact. A small bloom of debris and venting atmosphere on the Vreth ship's port side. A scratch. He fired again and again. Around him the station was being taken apart. The Vreth did not fight like humans. Human warships moved danced repositioned, they used speed. And angles, the Vreth fleet simply advanced in a line in a wall, the front. Ships took fire and held position, and returned fire, and the ships behind them moved up to fill any gaps. It was not a battle tactic, it was geometry. The geometry of a thing that had decided another thing needed to stop existing. The outer habitat ring took a hit that vented 2 sections to space. Emergency. Bulkheads slammed down. The medical bay lost power and switched to backup. One of the comm towers shattered and fell away, spinning slowly into the dark. Chen kept firing. His hands were steady. He was surprised by that. He had thought before this that when the moment came, his hands would shake. They did not. They just did what he had trained them to do, and some quiet part of his brain observed this with something that was not quite pride and not quite grief and not quite anything he had a word for. The north rail gun battery went offline. He heard it. A different kind of silence. On the shared channel where Corporal Kim had been calling targets, then nothing. He was the last gun. Commander Voss's voice came on the general station channel. She did not shout. She spoke the way she always spoke, clear and direct, as if she was giving a weather briefing. All personnel, this is Commander Voss. The station cannot hold. I am ordering all non-combat personnel to the emergency pods. Soldiers at your stations, you have done everything that could be done. I am proud of every one of you. A pause. This is not the end. This is a message, and it has been sent. Chen heard her say that and understood immediately what she meant. The last word already flying home. He fired the south railgun 3 more times before a Wraith energy pulse took out the battery's power coupling, and the gun went dead in his hands. He sat there for a moment in the dark, in the silence, with nothing left to fire. Through the viewport he could see the Wraith ships close now, massive, clear as throat, filling the space where the stars had been. He picked up his personal rifle. He went to find the others. The emergency pods launched, 41 of them, carrying the people who had made it to the launch bay in time. Children, scientists, the baker clutching a bag of flour for a reason she would not be able to explain later, but that made sense to her at the time. Some soldiers, not all, 41 pods spinning away from the station in all directions. Small white seeds thrown into the dark. The Wraith did not shoot the pods. This was noted afterward by everyone who studied what happened at Kepler 7. The Wraith did not kill the people in the pods. They let them go. It was interpreted in different ways by different people. Some said it meant the Wraith had limits. Some said it meant they were making a point that they wanted witnesses. Some said it simply meant the pods were too small to bother with. Voss was not in a pod. She stayed on the command deck until the Wraith boarding parties cut through the airlock. She was still transmitting on the last word frequency, describing everything she saw, calm and precise. Wraith boarding forces entering the station. They are armed with energy weapons, short range. They are moving in teams of 6. They do not appear to be taking prisoners. She paused. The sounds of the boarding were getting louder. They appear to be searching for something, I don't know what. Another pause. Kepler 7 to Earth Command, we are down. Her voice did not change. My name is Commander Sarah Voss. I am 44 years old. This station was not a military target. Remember that. Remember us. The signal continued transmitting for Another 11 seconds, then it stopped. 7 light-years away, a listening station on the moon of a gas giant, called Petra's World, sat in the cold and the dark and caught the signal with a dish the size of a football field. An automated system flagged it priority, coded it, and fired it onward on a tight beam relay that would reach Earth in just under 9 hours. On Earth, in a building in New Geneva with no exterior windows and a name that did not appear on any public registry, a man named Director Henrik Sahlberg was woken at 2:00 in the morning. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment in the dark. Then he dressed, then he walked down a long corridor to a room with a single table and a single screen. He read the report, he watched the sensor data, he watched the 212 ships, he watched the guns, he sat with it for a long time. Then he picked up a phone that had only one number programmed into it, a phone that had never been used in the 17 years he had held this office. It rang once, a voice answered, it said nothing, it simply waited. Director Sahlberg said 4 words, activate the Omega protocol. The voice on the other end said confirmed. Time of activation 2:17 Greenwich Standard. Logging now. Somewhere in a facility that was not on any map. Lights began coming on, not slowly all at once. The facility had no name on any official record. It existed on a moon called Dura, orbiting a gas giant in a system 3 jumps from Earth. The system had no habitable planets, no resources worth mining, no reason for anyone to be there. That was, of course, exactly why it had been chosen. From the outside, Dura looked like every other airless rock in the galaxy, gray and cratered and dead, with a thin dust haze that never quite settled. If you flew past it, your sensors would show you nothing interesting, which was also by design. The sensor masking array, buried under the surface, had cost more to build than the GDP of several smaller nations, and it worked perfectly from the inside. Dura was the most dangerous place in the known galaxy. When the 4 words came through, when Director Sahlberg said, activate the Omega protocol, into that phone, every light in the facility came on at once, and every person who worked there stopped whatever they were doing and stood very still for exactly 1 second, not because they had been ordered to, but because they all understood in the same moment what those words meant. They had trained for this. They had spent years training for this. Some of them had spent their entire careers here, waiting for a signal they privately hoped would never come. Now it had come, and for 1 second they were still. Then they moved. Admiral James Harlow was 59 years old and had been commander of the Omega fleet for 6 years. Before that, he had commanded a carrier group in the Call conflict, had fought 2 engagements that history books described as decisive, and he described as expensive. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, with a face that looked like it had been carved by someone who valued function over beauty. His officers said he had 2 expressions, thinking and decided. They were not wrong. He was in the facilities command center when the activation signal arrived, already awake, already dressed, because the preliminary sensor data from the Petra's World relay had reached him 40 minutes earlier, and he had known, reading it, what was coming. He had not slept. He had sat in the command center drinking black coffee and watching the numbers and waiting. When the confirmation came through, he set down his coffee. All hands, he said. His voice carried without effort. It was the kind of voice that had given orders. In loud rooms for 30 years, Omega. Protocol is confirmed active. This is not a drill. Begin pre-launch sequence. On all hulls, I want full drive. Diagnostic complete in 40 minutes. Navigation has target coordinates. Weapons crews to stations. No one cheered. No one spoke except to confirm orders. The room filled with the sound of keyboards and boots and the low hum of systems waking up that had never been used outside of testing. Harlow walked to the main viewport. Outside in the caverns carved from Dura's rock over 17 years of construction, the Omega fleet sat in rows. 53 warships, not the largest ships in the human fleet. That was not the point. These were not carriers or support vessels or the kind of ships built to hold territory. These were built for one thing only. Each one was wrapped in a hull alloy that did not appear in any published materials. Registry. Each one carried weapon systems that did not exist in any arms treaty because humanity had never told anyone they existed. Each one had a fold drive capable of crossing 12 light years in a single jump, which was by a significant margin faster than anything any other species had ever built. The galaxy knew humans were fast. They did not know how fast that had been intentional. Harlow looked at his fleet. He thought about the woman on the last word transmission, her voice steady as her station was taken apart around her. He thought about the children who had been in the school. He did not feel anger. He was past the age where anger was useful to him. What he felt instead was a cold, settled thing, a weight that had found its right place in his chest. He turned back to the room. 40 minutes, he said again, not 41. Vreth High Commander, who had ordered the attack on Kepler-7, was named Ketvesh. He was, by Vreth standards, young, barely 200 years old, and ambitious in the way that young Vreth commanders sometimes were. He presented the for the Kepler-7 strike to the Vreth High Council 3 months ago with charts and projections and the kind of careful language that made a violent thing sound like a sensible one. The argument was simple. Human expansion had reached the edge of the Vreth Third territorial zone. If it continued at its current rate, in 40 years the humans would be inside Vreth space. Better to establish a boundary now. Better to demonstrate clearly and early that there were places humans did not go. A single strike on a small outpost civilian, yes, but that was part of the point, would send a message that no diplomatic channel could match. The High Council had approved it. Now Ket Vash stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his crews finishing their work on the wreckage of Kepler-7. He was not a cruel commander. The pods had been allowed to go. There would be survivors. That too was part of the message. You need living mouths to carry words back. His communications officer brought him the standard after-action report. 212 ships deployed, 0 Vreth casualties. The outpost was gone. He composed his message to Earth Command himself. It was precise and formal as diplomatic communications required. It said in the language of Galactic Common that the Vreth Dominion considered the matter of the Kepler-7 sector closed. That human expansion into Zone 3 would be treated as an act of aggression, and that the Vreth Dominion hoped this demonstration of intent would allow both species to move forward in a spirit of Mutual understanding, he was quite pleased with the phrasing mutual understanding. It implied equals. It was not ungenerous. He sent the message. Then he waited for the human response. He expected something formal, possibly angry, definitely weak. Humans were not a warrior species, not really. They expanded, they built, they traded. They had never fought a war on the scale the Vreth had fought in their early centuries. The Call conflict had been minor, the border skirmishes were minor. Humans could fight, yes, but they did not love it. They did not build entire philosophies around it. When pressed, they negotiated. He was very confident they would negotiate. The response that came back from Earth Command was not what he expected. It was not angry. It was not a list of demands. It was not a request for talks. It was 8 words. You have 48 hours to evacuate your home world. That was all. Kit Vash read it twice. Then he read it a third time in case he had missed something. He had not. 8 words, no signature, no diplomatic title, just the message on official Earth Command frequencies, time-stamped and verified. He stared at it for a long moment, then he laughed. It was a hard, clicking sound, the Vreth equivalent of a laugh, and his bridge crew heard it and relaxed, because if the commander was laughing, the humans had clearly said something ridiculous. Evacuate our home world, he said, and said it aloud so they could all hear it and appreciate it. They want us to evacuate our home world, the home world of the Vreth. Dominion was called Vethker. It was the 3rd planet of a yellow star in a system that the Vreth had occupied for over 4,000 years. Its orbital defenses alone were enough to stop a human carrier group. Its planetary shield grid had been built and upgraded over 3 centuries. Vethker had not been successfully attacked in 2,000 years of Vreth history. The idea that humanity with their little outposts and their fold drives and their bread bakeries could threaten Vethker was not just unlikely, it was funny. Ket Vash sent his response, also brief. Come then. What Ket Vash did not know, and what almost no one outside of human military command knew, was what humanity had been building for the past 17 years. It had started after the Call conflict, a quiet review conducted by a woman named Admiral Yeva Marsh, who had since retired and gone to live on a farm on New Zealand, that asked a single question: if a species with significantly greater military capability than anything humanity had yet encountered decided to erase human civilization, what would we do about it? The answer before the review was not much. Admiral Marcia found this unacceptable. She did not present her conclusions to the public. She presented them in a room with no recording devices to the Secretary of Defense and 2 members of the Oversight Committee. What she told them was simple: humanity was expanding. Expansion created contact. History did not always go well, and humanity was, by the standards of the species they were meeting, young, raw, vulnerable in ways they did not fully understand yet. She proposed something that had no public name but was internally called the certainty doctrine. The logic was old as human warfare. It was the logic of the nuclear deterrent applied to space. You did not build the weapon to use it. You built it so that using it would never be necessary. You built it and you never told anyone you had it, and you maintained it, and you hoped with everything you had that it would gather dust forever. But you built it capable. You built it so that if the day came, there would be no second guessing, no long war, no chance for a species to calculate that they could absorb humanity's response and come out ahead. On the other side, you built it so that the response would be final, and you built it fast because if you were going to act as a deterrent, the response had to arrive before the attacker could adapt, before they could evacuate their military, before they could scatter their command structure. The response had to arrive, and it had to be decisive. And it had to happen so fast that the galaxy would understand in one clear and terrible moment that attacking humanity was not a gamble, it was an ending. 47 minutes after Director Solberg made his call, Admiral Harlow walked onto the bridge of his flagship, the HMZ Reckoning, which had never before left the Dura facility, and gave the order to launch. 53 ships moved out of the rock caverns and into space. No formation drills, no ceremony. They simply rose and oriented, and their fold drives began to spin up in the space around each ship. Began to do the thing that fold drives made space do: a slight distortion, a shivering in the light, like heat haze over summer asphalt. Except cold, on Dura the lights went back to their regular setting. Technicians who stayed behind sat at their stations and watched the fleet go. Some of them had worked in that facility for 10 years and never seen all 53 ships move at once. Some of them were crying. Some of them were very quiet. All of them understood what they were watching. They were watching the answer across the galaxy. Other species noticed things. The Havari Trade Consortium had listening posts on 17 systems along the human border. Their systems flagged the unusual fold drive signatures coming from a system that was supposed to be empty. A Havari analyst named Shorath filed an alert which moved up her chain of command with the speed that unusual things moved in bureaucracies, which is to say slowly, until it reached someone senior enough to recognize what they were looking at, and then very fast. The Veth Survey Guild, which had 7 observational platforms in the outer sectors, caught the energy bloom of 53 fold drives spinning up simultaneously and sent it to their science directorate with a note that said only, "We have not seen a human fleet this size before." The Galactic Assembly's open channel monitors, which tracked major military movements as part of the interspecies non-escalation treaty, logged the departure signature and automatically generated a query to human diplomatic channels. The query asked for the nature and destination of the fleet as per protocol. It sat in the outbox for 48 minutes before a human diplomatic attaché named Priya Nair sent back a response. Her response cited Article 9 of the treaty, subsection 4, paragraph 2. The paragraph was only 3 sentences long. It had been included in the treaty at human insistence 17 years ago during the drafting sessions. Most of the other species at the table had barely looked at it. It said, in the event of an unprovoked armed attack upon a human civilian installation resulting in loss of life, the human government reserves the right to respond with proportional and necessary force without prior notification to the Assembly. The nature and scale of such force shall be determined solely by human military command. This provision shall supersede all notification and approval requirements. Most of the Assembly members who read that response had to look up the paragraph. They had forgotten it was in there. When they found it and read it, the room got very quiet. A Havarian ambassador named Dean Saul, who had been in the diplomatic service for 40 years and was known for never losing his composure. Read the paragraph 3 times, then he pulled up everything he had on human military capability, then he pulled up the censored data from his listening post. 53 ships all moving toward Vreth space. He sent an urgent message to Ket Vash, flagged at maximum priority, it said. Respond to the human ultimatum. Do it now, do not wait. The message arrived at Ket Vash's flagship 4 minutes after the Omega fleet folded out of the Dura system. It arrived too late. In the deep dark of space, 53 ships bent light around themselves and vanished. The escape pod was 4 m long and smelled like recycled air and fear. Private Marcus Chen sat with his back against the curved wall and his knees pulled up to his chest and counted the people around him. 11, 3 soldiers, including Sergeant Dara Mwangi, who had a burn along her left forearm from the battery fire and had wrapped it with a strip torn from her undershirt. 5 civilians, 2 engineers, a lip technician, a woman named Hessa who ran the station commissary, and a man whose name Chen did not know but who had been one of the dock workers, and 3 children, a boy of about 8 and 2 girls, maybe 6 and 10, who had been in the school when the attack started. They had no parents with them. Hesse had her arms around the youngest girl and was talking to her quietly, and the girl was not crying, but her eyes were very wide and she had not blinked in a long time. The pod had no propulsion beyond its initial ejection thrust. It was drifting. The beacon was transmitting a low automated pulse on the standard rescue frequency, and there was nothing to do but wait and hope that someone picked it up before the air scrubbers ran to the end of their cycle, which the pod's small display told Chen would happen in approximately 61 hours. He had done the math twice and gotten the same number both times and decided that doing it a third time would not improve the situation. Sergeant Wangi was at the pod's tiny viewport looking out. She had been there for a long time. What can you see? Chen asked. Debris, she said. Some of it is ours. She paused. The Vreth ships are still there, most of them. Some of them are moving around the wreckage, looking for something. Maybe she didn't move from the viewport or showing off. Chen thought about Commander Voss. He thought about the last word transmission, which he had heard parts of on his headset before the battery went offline. He thought about her voice, the steadiness of it. He had met officers who performed steadiness, who put it on like a uniform in front of their soldiers because they knew it was required. Voss had not been performing. Her voice had sounded like a person who had made their peace with something and was simply completing the last tasks available to them. He thought about the 8 words that Earth Command would receive, the 48-hour ultimatum. He had heard about the Omega Protocol. Everyone in border station service had heard about it the way you heard about things that were officially unconfirmed, in fragments, in whispers, in the careful wording of senior officers who neither confirmed nor denied. He had never been sure if it was real or the kind of story soldiers told each other to feel better about standing in the dark at the edge of everything. He was starting to think it was real. He looked at the 3 children. The 8-year-old boy had fallen asleep against the wall, which was either gift or a sign that his body had simply shut down the part of itself that could process what was happening. The older girl was watching Chen with steady dark eyes. She looked like she was waiting for him to tell her something true. He tried to think of something true that would also be comforting. Help is coming, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. How do you know? Because we sent the signal, he said, and we don't leave people behind. She thought about that, then she leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Not because she believed him, Chen thought, but because she had decided to act as if she did, which was a different thing and in some ways braver. On Veth Core, the home world of the Vreth Dominion, life continued as it always had. The planet was old in the way that only the home worlds of ancient species could be old, layered and dense with history. Every city built on top of the bones of older cities, every mountain range crossed by roads that had been walked for thousands of years. The atmosphere was thick and warm and had the particular golden color that Vreth biology had evolved under. The cities were beautiful in their way, towering things, hard-edged and precise, built without curves because Vreth architecture had never valued softness. The population was about 4 billion. They worked, they raised young, they argued politics and remembered ancestors and made plans for the future in the casual way that people do when they have no reason to believe the future will look different from the present. The planetary defense grid floated in orbit above them, 17 shield satellites in a synchronous ring, 42 weapons platforms, 4 permanent defense stations, each one bigger than the station that had been Kepler 7, each one built for war rather than for science or bread or children. The grid had been in place for 300 years. In that time it had been tested twice in actual combat in conflicts that were now so long ago they were considered ancient history. It had never failed. The people of Core did not know about the strike on Kepler 7 in any detail. The Vreth Dominion did not have a free press in the way that some species did. Information moved through official channels shaped by official hands. What the people knew was that there had been an action on the border, that it had been successful, and that the Dominion was secure. They went about their days. In the galactic assembly chamber, no one was going about their day. The assembly met in a station called the Concord, positioned in neutral space between 3 major territorial boundaries. The chamber was built to hold representatives of 41 species, and it was designed with the understanding that those species ranged enormously in size, atmospheric preference, and sensory capability. The result was a room that always looked slightly chaotic. Different atmospheric sections, different lighting zones, translation systems running constantly in the background. Today the chaos was not architectural. Ambassador Dean Saul of the Havari Consortium stood at the central podium. He was a large being, taller than most humans by about a head, with the pale gray skin and wide-set eyes that were characteristic of his species. He was known for being calm, for measured words, for never making a claim he could not support with evidence. He was not calm today. I want to make sure every representative in this chamber understands what we are looking at, he said. His translation came through in 37 languages simultaneously, each one carrying his exact tone. This is not a human patrol. This is not A response force. This is a fleet of 53 warships of a class and capability that no external intelligence service, including mine, which is among the best in this assembly, had any record of. They appeared from a system we believe to be uninhabited. Their fold drive signatures indicate a range and speed that exceeds what we believe to be the upper limit of human propulsion technology. He paused and let that sit. The human government has invoked Article 9 subsection 4. They are not required to tell us their destination, and they have not done so. However, given the timing and given the recent events at Kepler 7, I think we all understand where that fleet is going. The room was very quiet. 41 species and none of them speaking. Veth survey representative, small, four-limbed, very still in the way that the Veth went still when they were thinking hard, raised a communication flag. What is the expected arrival time? Dean Saul looked at his data based on the fold drive signatures and the distance to the Vreth home system. He stopped. He looked at the number again, because the first time he looked at it, he thought he had made an error. He had not made an error. Based on these numbers, the fleet would arrive in the Vreth home system in approximately 3 hours. More silence. 3 hours, the Veth representative said in a tone that was not a question, more like someone reading a word in a language they did not speak and not being sure they had. Read it right. 3 hours, Dean Saul confirmed. The chamber filled with sound on the bridge of the HMS Reconning fold space looked the way it always looked, like nothing, like the absence of everything, like the universe holding its breath. The viewport showed a featureless silver gray that made the eyes feel tired if you looked at it too long. Most experienced officers did not look at it at all. There was nothing to see in fold space. You were between places, between moments, and the best thing to do was concentrate on the place you were going. Admiral Harlow was reviewing the Vreth home system data for the 9th time. He knew the orbital defense grid by heart. At this point, he knew the positions of all 17 shield satellites, all 42 weapons platforms, the 4 defense stations. He knew the estimated response time of the Vreth standing fleet, ships that would be scrambling from their home system burst the moment the Omega fleet dropped out of fold. He knew the geography of the engagement. He also knew something that the Vreth did not know. He knew 12 years ago a human deep cover intelligence asset had obtained the complete technical specifications of the Vreth planetary shield grid, not the external facing data, not the publicly available design documents, but the actual engineering files, the maintenance logs, the test results. Every system had weaknesses. The Vreth shield grid had 3 specific ones, identified by human engineers who had spent years doing nothing else but looking for them. Harlow knew exactly where to push. He thought about the 48-hour ultimatum. He had written it himself, actually, or rather he had approved the final wording of it, which had been drafted by a team of 3 people in a room down the corridor from his office. The number 48 had been chosen deliberately, long enough that the Vreth would not believe it was real, not so long that it could be mistaken for hesitation. He did not expect the Vreth to evacuate. He had given the ultimatum because it was the right thing to do, because he was not a man who believed in killing people who did not need to die for billion people lived on Vethkar. They had not ordered the attack on Kepler-7. They had not voted for Ket Vash. They had simply woken up that morning on the planet where they had always lived. He had given them 48 hours. What they did with 48 hours was their choice. He looked at the fold space on the viewport and thought about Sarah Voss, the way he had been thinking about her since he first heard the last word. Recording. He had never met her. She was a border station commander, not the kind of officer whose path crossed with fleet admirals very often, but he had listened to her voice, clear and steady at the end, and he knew the kind of soldier she had been, he thought. She sent the message, I am the answer, 30 minutes to drop point. Navigation called out, all stations. Confirm ready, Harlow said. Confirmations came back one by one, 53. Ships, all of them ready, all of them. Built for exactly this. Ket Vash received the assembly alert and the Havari ambassador's message in the same 2-minute window. He read them both. He read them standing on his bridge, very still, with the particular stillness of a person whose confidence has just encountered something it was not built to handle. 53 ships, 3 hours, a class of vessel no one had on record. He called his chief tactical officer. What do we know about this fleet? Nothing. Confirmed, the officer said. The fold signatures are outside anything in our database. Their drive capability. He stopped. He made the clicking sound that meant he was recalculating. Their drive capability is significantly beyond what our intelligence had assessed for human propulsion. Ket Vash was quiet. Hi, Commander, his officer said carefully. Should we begin alerting the Home System Defense Command? Send the alert, Ket Vash said. He said it in a voice that was very controlled because he was a Vred commander and control was expected. Tell them a human fleet is inbound. Tell them to bring the full grid online. He did not say what he was thinking. What he was thinking was that he had sent a message to humanity that said, come then. And they had come. They had come with 53 ships that didn't exist in any record. They had come in 3 hours when 3 hours was technically impossible. They had come without a second ultimatum, without a counteroffer, without any of the diplomatic maneuvering that species did when they were preparing to threaten but not to act. They had simply come. Outside the viewport, the wreckage of Kepler-7 was still floating, small pieces of metal and plastic and the things people kept in their spaces, drifting and cooling. A coffee mug, the remains of a table, something that might have been a child's drawing laminated, spinning slowly in the silence. Ket Vash looked at it for the first time since the operation began. He felt something. He did not have a clean word for not fear, not yet. Something quieter than fear, something that lived in the space between certainty and doubt, between what you had been sure of and what you were no longer sure of. He had been sure that humans would not come. They were coming. He had been sure they could not get here in 3 hours. They would be here in 3 hours, and somewhere deep in the part of him that was a military mind, before it was anything else, a cold and honest voice said, they were ready. They were already ready. They built something and they hid it, and they have been waiting, not hoping it would never be needed, waiting for the moment someone gave them the reason. He looked at the wreckage of Kepler-7. Again, he had given them the reason. In the outer dark between the stars, 53 Human ships fell through fold space like a held breath, like the pause before a word that cannot be taken back, like the last quiet moment before the answer arrives. They were 22 minutes from the Vreth home system. The grid was coming online. It would not be enough. They came out of fold space all at once, not in sequence, not one by one, the way most species deployed ships from fold. Staggered arrivals spread across several minutes, each ship needing a moment to stabilize before the next one came through. Human fold drives had been designed specifically to avoid that window of vulnerability. All 53 ships dropped back into normal space in the same 2-second window, arriving already oriented, already at combat speed, already in formation. The Vreth defense grid registered them at the same moment they appeared. The response was immediate. Ketvash had sent his alert ahead, and the Home System Defense Command had taken it seriously enough to bring everything online. Every shield satellite was at full power. Every weapons platform had its targeting systems active. The 4 defense stations were fully crewed and battle-ready. The grid opened fire. The first 4 seconds, what came out of those platforms was not like what had hit Kepler 7. Kepler 7 had been hit with ship-mounted weapons. Powerful, yes, but built for ship-to-ship engagement. Veth Core Defense Grid fired planetary grade energy weapons, the kind of firepower that had been designed to stop fleets, to stop invasions, to make any attacker look at the numbers and decide that the cost was not worth it. The barrage hit the human fleet on the Bridge of the Reckoning. The impact registered as sound before it registered as anything else, a deep resonant boom that moved through the hull like a struck bell. Then the lights flickered once, then the shields absorbed the rest of it, and the status board showed green across all 53 ships, and the sound faded. Admiral Harlow had not moved from his command chair, shields at 91%, his tactical officer reported. Her name was Commander Yuki Sato, and she had the precise, unhurried voice of someone who had run this engagement in simulation more than 400 times. No hull damage on any ship. The grid fired again. Second barrage, heavier than the first. The targeting adjusted. Harlow felt it differently this time, longer, a grinding pressure rather than a single blow, as if the universe was leaning on the fleet and asking it to move. Shields at 83%, Sato said, still green across the board. Harlow looked at the tactical display. The grid's 17 shield satellites were arranged in a standard defensive ring around the planet. On the surface it was a solid formation, but there were 3 places in that ring where the satellites' coverage overlapped at a slightly different frequency, a calibration quirk that had been in the system since the last upgrade cycle, documented in the maintenance logs that human intelligence had obtained 12 years ago. Those 3 points were not weak in any way that the Vreth knew about, but they were weak in the specific way that the Reckoning's weapons had been built to exploit. Navigation, Harlow said, take us to position Alpha. All ships follow. The fleet moved. It did not charge the grid head-on. It pivoted. A smooth, coordinated turn. All 53 ships moving together with the kind of precision that only comes from crews who have practiced the same maneuver until it lives in their hands rather than their heads. The fleet moved toward the first of the 3 calibration points in the shield satellite ring, and as it moved, it continued to take fire, and its shields continued to hold, and nothing about the way Harlow sat in his chair suggested that any of this was exceptional. The first satellite went down 11 minutes. After the fleet arrived, Harlow's weapons crews hit the calibration point with a synchronized burst from 9 ships, a combination of frequencies that the satellite shield was not optimized to handle, delivered in a precise sequence that the Vreth engineers who built the satellite had never considered, because no one was supposed to know the calibration data. The satellite shield collapsed inward, then the satellite itself came apart in a brief, bright bloom of debris. The gap it left in the ring was small, but it was a gap. First point open, Sato confirmed. Moving to position Beta, the fleet pivoted again. On the Vreth defense station nearest to the gap, the commander was a career officer named Deathworlders who had served in home system defense for 30 years. She watched the satellite go down and understood several things at once. She understood that the humans had known about the calibration point, which meant they had intelligence that should not exist. She understood that her grid's return fire was doing very little to the human fleet, which meant their shielding was operating on principles she did not have in her threat database. She understood that the humans were not charging randomly. They were moving with purpose to specific points, which meant they had a plan they had built long before they arrived. She sent an emergency alert to the High Council on Vethkor. It said, "The grid is compromised. I recommend beginning civilian shelter protocols." Then she kept fighting because she was a career officer, and that was what career officers did. The second satellite took 14 minutes. The third took 9. Human crews were faster now. Their rhythm established, their targeting refined by the data from the first 2 engagements. The ring had 3 gaps in it. The defense stations began moving to cover them, firing constantly, and the reckoning took a direct hit from a station-grade cannon that shook the entire ship hard enough to throw 2 crew members from their stations. "Shields at 64%, Sato said, and one of the throne crew members got back to their station and said, "Still here," and kept working. "Weapons platforms next," Harlow said. "Priority order as planned. Take them down." The 42 weapons platforms died over the next 18 minutes. They did not die quietly. They fired until they could not fire anymore, and several of them managed significant hits on human ships. 2 vessels had to pull back with shield failures. One had a breach in an outer compartment that sealed automatically. One had a weapon system knocked offline. But they died one by one in the priority order that Harlow's planners had established. They died. The defense stations lasted longer. They were larger, more heavily shielded, crewed by people who were very good at their jobs and who fought with a particular ferocity of people defending the place. Their families lived. Deathworlders station was the last one standing. She fought it for 23 minutes after the others had gone, using everything she had, throwing everything at the human ships until her station had no more weapons to throw. When it was over, her station was crippled and drifting. Her crew was alive. The human ships did not finish the station. They left it drifting, powerless, alive. That detail was noted by everyone who studied the engagement. Afterward, the defense grid was gone. 31 minutes after the Omega fleet had appeared in the Vreth home system, the planet below Them was naked. No shield ring, no weapons platforms, no defense stations. That could fight back, just a planet. Vethker from orbit was beautiful. The gold atmosphere made it glow warmly against the dark and the continent. Shapes were different from Earth's, more angular, less curved like the Vreth themselves, but the oceans were the same. Blue-black, that oceans were everywhere. And the cloud patterns moved the way. Cloud patterns moved on every world that had weather, and from up here it looked like every other place that 4 billion people called home. Harlow looked at it for a long moment. Then he opened a channel, not to the defense station, not to Ket Vass's fleet, which was still out at the border with Kepler-7's wreckage and had not yet made it back. They were hours away, and they would find an empty parking spot where their home system's defenses used to be, not to a military channel at all. He opened the broadest civilian channel the Vreth used, the one that carried public broadcast to every receiver on the planet. He spoke in galactic common, slowly and clearly. People of Vethker, my name is Admiral James Harlow of the Human Omega Fleet. 41 hours ago, your government attacked a human civilian outpost called Kepler-7. 847 people lived there. Your government sent 212 warships. There were 60 soldiers defending a station built for science and for families. He paused. We gave your government 48 hours to evacuate this planet. That offer was made in the hope that your government would use it. They did not. What happens next is the consequence of what was done at Kepler-7. I am sorry for what I am about to do. I am not sorry for doing it. He closed the channel. Sir, said Lieutenant Commander Fenn, his communications officer. He was young, 26, and his voice had something in it that was not quite argument and not quite question, but was trying to be. Neither, sir. There are 4 billion people on that planet. I know, Harlow said. We the weapon. Fenn stopped. He swallowed. Sir, Harlow looked at him. The weapon targets the planetary core. Lieutenant Commander, the cascade will take 6 hours. 6 hours from the moment we fire. He lit that land, the Vreth Dominion has emergency evacuation ships capable of moving 200,000 people per hour. In 6 hours they can move at minimum 1.2 billion people to the outer system if they start now. He turned back to the display. We gave them 48 hours. And they chose not to use it. I am giving the planet 6 more. The moment the weapon fires, the 6-hour clock begins. What they do with that 6 hours is their choice. Fenn was quiet. I need you at your station, Harlow said. Not because I am ordering you, because I need you. Fenn sat back down. Across the fleet, a signal went out, a single coded transmission from the Reckoning to 52 other ships. The signal contained 2 words: weapon ready. On each of the 12 designated ships, 12 out of the 53, the ones built for this specific purpose, a system that had never been used outside of testing, began its initialization sequence. The weapon was not a missile, it was not a beam, it was a gravitational resonance emitter device that, when aimed at a planetary core, began a cascade reaction in the planet's internal structure, a reaction that built on itself like a fire, given enough fuel until the core could not hold its shape. It was not a clean death. For a world, nothing about this was clean, but it was designed to give time. The cascade was slow enough that the people on the surface would feel the Earthquakes starting would see the readings on their instruments, would understand what was happening and have hours to run. It was not mercy exactly. It was the minimum that a man like Harlow could offer and still sleep. Barely. He thought about Commander Voss. He thought about 31 children in a school. At the edge of everything, he thought about the 8 words he had sent to Ket. Vass, you have 48 hours to evacuate your Homeworld. And Ket Vass had sent back 2 words. Come then. Come then. Harlow would come. Weapons. He said. His voice was the same as it always was. Confirmed targeting, Commander. Sato ran the confirmation check. Targeting confirmed. Core resonance lock established on all 12 emitters. Firing. Solution is clean. On my mark, Harlow said. Outside the viewport, Vethkor glowed golden in the dark, beautiful and old and full of people who were not soldiers, most of them who had not ordered anything, who had simply lived there because it was the place they had always lived. He thought, I wish you had left, he said. 12 weapons fired simultaneously. There was no visible beam, no dramatic light show. The emitters simply activated, and somewhere deep below the surface of Vethkor, in the iron silicate heart of the planet, something began, something that would not stop. The clock started. 6 hours. Harlow did not look away from the planet. All ships, he said, begin recording. Every ship, full sensor logs. From this moment forward, he paused. The galaxy needs to see what this costs. Both sides, the fleet recorded below them. Vethkor began to shake. Earthquakes started small. The people of Vethkor felt them the way people feel. The first signs of something wrong. Vibration in the floor, a rattle in the walls, a sound that was too low to hear, but could be felt in the chest. In the cities, instruments registered the core fluctuations immediately. The science director had sent alerts to the government within minutes. The government, which had just received Deathworlders' emergency transmission from the defense station, was already in crisis session. They knew what it was. They had been told. Harlow had broadcast it on the civilian channel in plain galactic common, and even if they had not heard his words, the readings told the same story. The cascades were building. The core temperature was rising in a pattern that did not occur naturally. Whatever the humans had fired, it had found what it was looking for, and it was not stopping. 6 hours. The government activated the emergency evacuation fleet. Ships that had not been intended for this, cargo haulers, passenger liners, government transports, military supply vessels, were redirected and filled and launched. The spaceports became something that was hard to describe and harder to watch. 4 billion people, and the ships could move a fraction of them. Parents made choices that no parent should have to make. Young were sent first, then the old. Order broke down within the first hour and became simply whoever could get to a ship get to a ship. The Vreth were not a species given to public displays of emotion. Their culture valued restraint, dignity, the bearing of difficulty without open grief. But the spaceports on Vreth that day had none of that restraint, and the recordings that survived showed the kind of thing that looks the same in every species, in every language, on every world. People holding on to each other. The last moments before separation, not wanting to let go. The evacuation ships rose in streams, thousands of them. The ships that could not fold, that could only reach the outer system. filled their holds and launched and turned away from the planet that was shaking beneath them. In 6 hours, they moved 412 million people. 3,588,000,000 did not make it. Off the planet, Harlow watched the evacuation from the bridge of the reckoning. He watched every ship that rose. He counted them the way Voss had counted the days of her command, not because it changed anything, but because he believed a person should know exactly what they were responsible for. He watched the streams of ships climb away from the surface, and he watched the readings that showed the cascade, deepening the core temperature, climbing the seismic activity, spreading from the equatorial regions outward. At the 4-hour mark, the surface began to show visible changes. The golden atmosphere thickened, eruptions opened along 3 of the major fault lines, simultaneously, slow-moving at first. Then not. The oceans in the equatorial region began to behave strangely. Tide patterns disrupted, temperatures rising. The deep water beginning to do what deep water does when the heat below it becomes wrong. At the 5-hour mark, Commander Sato set down her tablet and did not pick it up again. Lieutenant Commander Finn had not spoken. In 2 hours, the bridge was very quiet, except for the automated systems and the low sound of the recordings running on every ship. At 5 hours and 41 minutes, the cascade reached the point that Harlow's engineers had called the threshold, the moment after which reaction was self-sustaining and nothing could stop it. He had known this moment would come. It did not make the moment easier to sit through. He sat through it. At 6 hours and 2 minutes, Vethker ended, not in an explosion, not the way planets died in old human entertainment. No dramatic fireball, no satisfying detonation. The core gave way from the inside, and the planet came apart over the course of 43 minutes, in the way that things come apart when the thing holding them together stops working. The surface cracked first, then the interior. The atmosphere scattered. The oceans, what was left of them, fell away into pieces. The pieces spread. In 43 minutes there was no Vethker. There was a debris field in the orbit of a yellow star where a planet had been for 4 billion years. Harlow looked at it for a long time. Then he stood up. He straightened his uniform. He spoke to his crew. Log time of completion, he said. Prepare the full engagement record for transmission to Earth Command and the Galactic Assembly. All logs, all recordings unedited. He paused. Every ship make sure your crews have access to medical and counseling support starting now, not when we get home. Now. He looked around the bridge, at Sato, at Finn, at the others who had sat here and done what they had been trained to do. You served well, every one of you. What we did today will not leave us. It should not leave us, but we did not start this, and we did not have a choice that was without cost. Remember that. No one spoke. He sat back down. He began writing his report. His handwriting was very steady. Ket Vass's fleet arrived at the edge of the Veth core system 4 hours after the planet was gone. They came out of fold space expecting to find a star system. They found a star in a debris field and 53 human warships sitting in the space where the orbital grid had been, running dark, silent, not firing, not advancing, just there, waiting. Ket Vass stood at his viewport for a very long time. His bridge crew did not speak. There was nothing to say. The readings were clear. The debris field's composition was clear. The Timeline was clear. He had sent the strike on Kepler 7 to send a message, to establish a border, to demonstrate that the Vreth Dominion was not to be tested. He had sent 212 ships against a station with 60 soldiers and a bread bakery, and humanity had responded by coming to the center of Vreth civilization and ending it in 31 minutes of fighting and 6 hours of consequence. He thought about the 8 words they had sent. You have 48 hours to evacuate your homeworld. He had laughed at those 8 words he had sent back to come then. He looked at the debris field where Veth Core had been, where 200 years of his own life had been built, where his family had lived, where the oldest Vreth city had stood since before humanity had discovered iron. He sat down. It was not a dignified sitting, it was the sitting of a thing whose legs have stopped working beneath it. His communications officer said very quietly, "High Commander, the human fleet is hailing us, put it through." He said. Harlow's voice came through. Not angry, not triumphant. It was the same voice that had broadcast to the civilians of Veth Core, measured and tired and carrying the weight of what it was saying without hiding from it. "Commander Ket Vass, I am transmitting the coordinates of your evacuation fleet. They are in the outer system. They are unharmed. We did not touch them." A pause. "Go to your people. What you do next is your decision. We will not pursue." The channel closed. Ket Vash sat in the silence. Then he said, "Set course for the outer system." His voice was something he did not recognize. "Take us to our people." Fleet turned away from the debris field and moved. The Galactic Assembly received the full engagement record. Every log, every sensor file, every second of the Reckoning's bridge recordings. 12 hours after Vethkur was gone, the chamber met in emergency session, all 41 species present. Ambassador Dean Saul had not slept. He had watched the live sensor feeds from the Helvari listening posts through the entire engagement. He had watched the grid fall in 31 minutes. He had watched the evacuation ships rise. He had watched the debris field form. He had been awake for 31 hours, and he was not the only one. He stood at the podium and looked at the room. 41 species, some of them had been considering, in the quiet way that species considered things, without saying them out loud, how much further humanity could be pushed. Some of them had disputes with human colonies. Some of them had been watching the Vreth situation and calculating. Some of them had been waiting to see what happened. Now they knew. "I have prepared a formal statement," he said. "I have reviewed it 6 times and I am satisfied that it is accurate and complete." He looked at his notes. Then he set his notes down. "I am going to say it simply instead." He looked at the room. "Do not attack humanity's people. Do not attack their stations. Do not attack their ships, their colonies, their civilians, or their interests." He paused. "They gave the Vreth 48 hours. Then they gave them 6 more. He let that's it. They are not impulsive. They are not aggressive. They have not expanded into any space that was not unclaimed. They have not started a conflict in their history that was not started first by someone else." He looked at the room one more time. "But they finished them, whatever they are. And I am no longer sure any of us understood what they are. They finish what is started against them, and they do not forget." He picked up his notes and stepped back from the podium. "I have nothing Further, the chamber was quiet for a long time. No one else came to the podium. The rescue ship found Chen's pod. 51 hours after it launched, it was a standard search and rescue vessel sent from the nearest human colony the moment the distress beacons were flagged, and it found all 41 pods within a 10-hour window. Most of the people in them were alive, some were not. The children were all alive. When the rescue ship's crew opened the hatch of Chen's pod, the first thing Chen did was check the count. 11 people in, 11 people out. He stood in the airlock of the rescue ship and confirmed this with his own eyes before he let himself breathe all the way. Muengi was behind him. Her arm had been properly bandaged now. She'd used the pod's small medical kit somewhere around hour 30 when the adrenaline had finally finished with her and the pain had found room to exist. She walked off the pod on her own feet. The rescue ship's doctor tried to get them both to sit down. Chen sat. Muengi did not. They were given food and water and blankets, and Chen ate his ration pack without tasting it, and the older girl from the school sat next to him and ate hers without speaking, and that was fine. Some things did not need words. An officer from the rescue ship came to give them the situation report. She was careful with it. She explained what had been transmitted from Earth Command, the Omega Protocol, the Omega Fleet, the engagement at Vethkor. She used the clear, direct language that people use when they are delivering news. That is too large for softer words. When she finished, the compartment was quiet. Chen thought about Kepler-7, about the smell of bread in the mornings, about Commander Voss at the comm panel, her voice steady as the walls came down, about 60 soldiers in a station full of people who had done nothing except live at the edge of human space and call it home. He thought about a planet that no longer existed. He thought about how those two things lived in the same sentence. He did not know what to call the thing he felt. It was not satisfaction. It was not grief. Exactly, though grief was part of it, it was something heavier than either. Something that did not resolve into a feeling he could name and file away. He thought 847 people, and Voss said it. This is a message, and it has been sent to. He understood now what she had meant. Not just the distress signal, not just the sensor data. She had meant something bigger. She had meant that the last thing she could do, the last thing any of them at Kepler-17 could do, was make sure that what happened to them meant something, that it was not just an ending, that it went somewhere. It had gone somewhere. The girl next to him had finished her ration pack. She was looking at the viewport at the stars outside. What happens now? She said. Chen looked at the stars with her. We go home, he said, and then he thought about it honestly, about a galaxy that had just watched 53 ships dismantle a planetary defense grid in 31 minutes and end a world in 6 hours. About 41 species sitting in the galactic assembly chamber with their notes put away and nothing left to say about the debris field where a home world had been, floating in the orbit of a yellow star. About the fact that humanity had not fired first, had not expanded into claimed space, had not built the Omega Fleet to conquer anything, had built it quietly and hidden it patiently, and kept it ready and hoped with the particular hope of people who understood history that it would never be needed, and then had used it completely without hesitation, with exactly as much warning as they had promised to give. And not 1 minute more, then we keep going, Chen said. That's what we do, we keep going. The girl thought about that. It seemed to be enough for her. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, and the stars kept moving outside the viewport. Somewhere in the outer system of a yellow star, a fleet of wrath evacuation ships drifted in the cold and looked at the space where their world had been. 412 million survivors. The beginning of something that would take generations to become a civilization again. Somewhere in New Geneva, in a room with no windows, Director Henrik Sahlberg read the final report. He read it all the way through, every page. Then he sat with it in the quiet of his office for a very long time. Somewhere in deep space, on the bridge of the reckoning, Admiral Harlow finished writing his report and closed the file. He did not feel like a man who had won something. He felt like a man who had done a necessary thing and who understood that necessary things are not always good things, and that carrying that difference was the price of the kind of work he did. He would carry it. He had always known he would have to eventually. He looked out the viewport at the stars. The galaxy was very quiet. It would stay quiet for a long time, not because the other species had nothing to say, but because they had seen something that morning that changed the way they understood the young species, with the round ships and the fast fold drives and the bread bakeries at the edge of their space. They had seen that humans were patient, that humans were restrained, that humans built and expanded and negotiated and kept their worst weapons hidden in the dark for years, hoping that day would never come. And they had seen what happened when someone made the day come. The lesson was clear. It was not written in any treaty or carved into any monument or formally stated in any diplomatic communique. It did not need to be. It lived now in the memory of every species who had been watching. In the gap in the star maps where a yellow star had 4 planets and now had 3. In the cargo bays of 412 million survivors who had made it off a world because humanity had given them 6 hours that they did not have to give. Lesson was this: humanity was not the biggest species in the galaxy, not the oldest, not the most advanced, not the most feared before that day, but when you hurt their people, they came from a moon no one had mapped, with ships no one had counted, at a speed no one had thought possible, with weapons no one had known existed. They came and they did not stop. That was enough. That was more than enough. In the rescue ship, moving through the quiet dark toward home, Private Marcus Chin sat with a blanket around his shoulders and a girl asleep beside him, and let the stars go past and did not think about what he had seen, because thinking about it would come later. It always came later, and for now there was just the motion and the warmth and the simple good fact of being alive. Outside, the stars were the same stars they had always been. The galaxy breathed and learned to be careful.